Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue the book Mysterious Monsters, Fact or Fiction. Once again delving into chapter 1, part 9 in this case, with the title being Living Pterodactyls Haunt Our Skies. So this is a chapter that focuses on the idea of these long lost dinosaurs. It has little mini segments on there as well. We've covered a good bunch of them in these last parts. This next one will just continue that trend. So let's go ahead and let's share this rest part of this chapter, and then I think it'll end on the next part as well. Love to hear what your own thoughts are with regards to these long lost living dinosaurs. The next segment is called Airplane Pterodactyl Encounter. So here's essentially what it states, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it as well. It says, a similar incident in South America was published in 1992 by the Australian weekly magazine People. In this encounter, a small commuter aircraft nearly crashed into a giant flying lizard over the mountain jungles of Brazil. A U.S. anthropologist named Dr. George Biles was supposedly aboard the plane, at least with regards to 24 passengers, and was quoted as saying, "This was a classic case of a white pterodactyl with a giant wingspan." Of course, I've heard the rumors for many years that these prehistoric creatures still roamed the Amazon, but I was skeptical like everyone else. But that wasn't an airplane or UFO flying beside us. It was a pterodactyl. The People story says that the pterodactyl was flying alongside the plane as it was preparing to land, and that the pilot veered away to avoid colliding with the giant bird. A stewardess named Maya Cabone is quoted as saying, "Here was this giant monster flying right next to the plane. He was only a few feet away from the window, and he looked right at me. I thought we were all gonna die." No actual size is given in the story, and tales like this start becoming suspect when the pilot is quoted as saying, "He was coming straight at us, and he was mighty big." Next segment is called The Feathered Serpent. In the mythology and religion of Central America, there is a very real tradition of Quetzalcoatl, of the feathered serpent. While Quetzalcoatl was a man or a series of men, he was named after the feathered serpent. Was there such an animal at one time, a flying reptile? Biologists say yes. Pterosaurs or pteranodons, but they have been extinct for millions of years, or have they? Or could they be one of other possible explanations for some of the chupacabra sightings? Film of a pterodactyl flying over the Yucatan was widely viewed in the early 1970s, according to famous cryptozoologist Loren Coleman in his book Mysterious America. Carvings of what appear to be pteranodons can be found in Mayan ruins at Tajín, located in northeastern Veracruz state in Mexico. Under the title Serpent Bird of the Mayans, Science Digest published a brief article in its November 1968 issue on the subject of a pteranodon being possibly carved into a wall at the Pyramid of Tajín. It says the article, an ancient Mayan relief sculpture of a peculiar bird with reptilian characteristics has been discovered in Totonacapan, in northeastern section of Veracruz, Mexico. Jose Diaz Baulio, a Mexican archaeologist journalist responsible for the discovery, says there is evidence that the serpent bird sculpture, located in the ruins of Tajín, is not merely the product of Mayan flights of fancy, but a realistic representation of an animal that lived during the period of the ancient Mayans, about 1,000 to 5,000 years ago. If indeed such serpent birds were contemporary with the ancient Mayan culture, the relief sculpture represents a startling evolutionary oddity. Animals with such characteristics are believed to have disappeared 130 million years ago. The Archaeomyths and the Archaeopteryx, to which the sculpture bears a vague resemblance, were flying reptiles that became extinct during the Mesozoic age of the dinosaurs. And since man did not appear, according to the current geological charts, until about 1 million years ago, there appears to be a 129 million year discrepancy. The twain, Mayan and serpent bird, should never have met. But Jose Diaz Bolio is continuing his investigation, and he says that he knows of the existence of a serpent bird skull that may hold a clue to the mystery once it has been identified. The idea that the feathered serpent of the Mayas was a real animal has been a popular subject over the years. The concept that the Mayan feathered serpent was a long, naked, flying reptile was used in the 1946 film The Flying Serpent, starring George Zucco, featured in the Adventures Unlimited video Dinosaurs Alive, and more recently in the 1982 David Carradine film Q, the Winged Serpent. The Q stands for the Mayan word Quetzalcoatl, or feathered serpent. While these grade B movies have made little impact on audiences, they do show that the idea of flying serpents, also called pteranodons, are a popular belief along the Mexican border. Next segment is called The Lost Pterodactyl Photo. According to the 14 investigator John Keel, more than 20 people have written to him claiming to have seen a photo of a dead pterodactyl nailed to the side of a building in Tombstone, Arizona. Keel claims that he has seen this photo too, but no one can remember where. In his column Beyond the Known in the March 1991 issue of Fate magazine, Keel discusses this intriguing photograph at length. He also quotes from a letter from the son of a Pennsylvania man named Robert Lyman, who had written numerous articles and books about the weird and the unknown. Lyman wrote about thunderbirds in one of his books entitled Amazing Indeed. About 1900, two prospectors shot and carried into Tombstone, Arizona, one of these birds. When nailed against the wall of the Tombstone Epigraph building, its wingspread measured 36 feet. A photograph showed 6 men standing under the bird with outstretched arms touching. One of them said, "Shucks, there is no such bird, never was and never will be. I saw that picture in a daily paper. Many other persons remember seeing it. No one has been able to find it in recent years. 2 copies were at Hammersley Fork only a few years ago. One burned in a home and the other was taken away by strangers." And then the next segment is called Officer, There's a Pterodactyl in My Backyard. That there were sightings of pterodactyls in the 1800s, I have no doubt. In fact, the sightings in the Sonora Desert continue to this day. In the early months of 1976, a rash of flying reptile sightings were reported in the Rio Grande River Valley along the Mexican-American border. One of the first encounters was in the early hours of December 26, 1975, when a rancher named Joe Suarez discovered that a goat he had tied up in a corral in Raymondville, Texas, about 30 miles north of the Rio Grande in southeastern Texas, had been ripped to pieces and partially eaten by some unknown assailant. The goat had been mauled from the right side and was lying in a pool of blood with the heart and lungs missing, with the snout bitten away. The blood was still wet and warm when police officers examined the carcass. They could find no footprints around the goat and concluded that a flying creature of unknown origin had caused this death. Then, in the same town, on January 14, 1976, at about 10:30 in the evening, on the north side of Raymondville, a young man named Armando Grimaldo was sitting in the backyard of his mother-in-law's house when he was attacked by a strange winged creature. "As I was turning to go look over on the other side of the house," said Armando to the Raymondville Press, "I felt something grab me, something with big claws. I looked back and saw it and it started running. I've never been scared of nothing before, but this time I really was. That was the most scared I've ever been in my whole life." This strange flying attacker had died out of the sky, and it was something Grimaldo described as being about 6 feet tall, with a wingspread he estimated as being from 10 to 12 feet. Its skin was blackish gray, leathery, and featherless. It had big, huge red eyes. Grimaldo was terrified. He screamed and tried to run, but tripped and fell face first into the dirt. As he struggled up to continue running for his mother-in-law's house, the beast's claws continued to attempt to grasp him securely, tearing his clothes, which were now virtually ripped to shreds. He managed to dive under a bush, and the attacking animal, now breathing heavily, flew away into the sky. Grimaldo then crashed into the house, collapsing on the floor, muttering pájaro, Spanish for bird, over and over again. He was taken to the hospital, treated for shock and minor wounds, and then released. And then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's pause it here. And then we'll continue again the next part in the next segment. Lots of good little mini segments to talk about here, isn't it? For starters, the first one is the airline pterodactyl encounter. So apparently there was an airline back in 1992 in South America, an airplane that was just flying about when all of a sudden something was basically running right towards it, according to one part of the story, or running alongside it. And this was a pterodactyl, apparently, something with a giant wingspan. Not only that, the pilot saw it, and the 24 passengers also saw it too, and the People's Story had multiple quotes associated with them. At first, I was kind of disregarded, but the fact that you had multiple witnesses and they were each telling a similar story, and this was in no less a People magazine, it kind of gives some more credence to it as well. Next segment was about the feathered serpent. It's the idea that somewhere there in the Yucatan was something associated from the Mayan culture days. So instead of something that was gone like 135 million years ago, as the chapter described, here you apparently had it living during the time of the Mayans, about 1,000 to 5,000 years ago. And if the story goes today, it's still alive. It's still there around that same area, and it's known as the feathered serpent. So it's something along the lines of called Quetzalcoatl. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But that's essentially what it's linked to. The fact that it showcased some movies tied to that same thing was pretty interesting too. To me, by far, the most interesting segment was the lost pterodactyl photo. I think that's the one you're looking at right now, in fact, here on the thumbnail. It's the idea that somebody or some people shot a pterodactyl and then carried it into Tombstone, Arizona, and not only that, but then nailed it against the wall of something called a Tombstone Epitaph building. And then it was gigantic. It was 36 feet when it came to its wing spread. This one, though, seems more of a little bit of a hoax. Like, I wouldn't go as far as calling it a hoax, but it's too good to be true. Like, where is the actual photograph? Somebody would have to have it. You don't have these things just lost. When you have one of the greatest pieces of evidence in pretty much the last 100 years, if not more, and it's lost, and people can't remember where it was or where they saw it, which would then turn link to where those people saw it and where they got it, and they would just create a little game finding its origin. I find it a little bit hard to believe. And then finally, last one, Officer, there's a pterodactyl in my backyard. Interesting title. Here you had a situation with a young kid, Armando Grimaldo, who was there sitting in the backyard of his mother-in-law's house when something started to attack him. He said pájaro, which is the Spanish word for bird, but here you have the notion that it was actually either pteranodon or a pterodactyl. And in his case, he was very lucky because he was too much of a battle in order to become dinner. So the pterodactyl basically gave up at that point. He was able to struggle enough to make it just fly away. Otherwise, he could have been within the pterodactyl's stomach later on. Let me know what you guys think about this chapter. Lots of good little mini segments so far. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.